Good evening. Welcome to the meeting of the Jefferson County Board of Education on Monday, February 13th. If you'd please join us for the pledge. Thank you. And I believe this evening we're starting with a presentation on the update on community engagement process to revise the discipline code.
Yes, ma'am. If Mr. Johnson, if you could put the presentation up, I would greatly appreciate it. So early in the school year in September, the board met and set forth several goals for the superintendent and our leadership. And one of them was looking at our discipline process. And we had several things that we wanted to accomplish out of that. Certainly, we are always looking to increase staff and student safety. We also are always interested in students' social emotional equilibrium. As you well know, we have seen some rather significant increases in aggressive behavior, misconduct, conflict between teachers and students. And there are a lot of reasons for that in terms of our social situation following COVID and kids' isolation and missed opportunities for them to socialize. But we have a number of students who are not responding to traditional discipline and understandably short-staffed and some frustration on the part of our staff. We also always have concerns about access to instruction when we have students who are disruptive. They are interrupting the instruction of others, and when we have students who are disruptive, who are removed from the class, they are missing portions of their education. We also wanted to ensure that we empowered better relationship and more connectivity and involvement on the part of parents and teachers. Children have a village in their lives, and sometimes those folks who are most interested in serving those children don't always talk to each other. They don't always have the relationship that lets the kid know that they are loved and that they're cared for. And yes, there's a degree of accountability, but that can be done in ways that don't bring about more harm, which leads me to another important piece of that, which is the gap that we have found in terms of the racial disparities in discipline that we see all across the state, in which children, in particular our Black and brown children, but also our children in poverty, struggle with classroom removals and with misconduct more often than their peers. And so one of the things that we were very interested in was having a very frank and meaningful conversation about what we could do within our walls to address some of those racial disparity issues. Now, recognizing that we don't control the world outside of our walls, and we aren't necessarily going to solve all of the world's problem within them, but we have a responsibility to all of our children, their safety, and their knowledge that they are loved and cared for here, and that we will not tolerate harm to them. Not physical harm, not emotional harm. We will not tolerate harm to them. And so a lot of this is us working through those goals and those commitments and talking about the best ways for us to move forward on those. And you're going to hear from several folks besides me tonight. If you could do the next slide. Because We involved a lot of people in this process. We've met repeatedly with these groups, principals, teachers, the service senate, parents. When I say we, Dr. Kramer Jefferson and I, who you'll meet shortly, went to every single secondary school that we had and interviewed several classrooms of students to talk to them from their perspective about the discipline issues and about what they saw in the schools, what concerned them, what affected their daily lives the most in terms of discipline. And it was eye-opening, as you'll see. In total, we interviewed and individually spoke with 186 separate folks over that time. Okay, next slide. So when we're talking about discipline, I will remind folks that in terms of discipline incidents, and we presented this to the board at the beginning of the year, that large number that you see there, the 73%, where it says one incident, of the discipline that we have, 3 out of 4 of our kids have one incident and they don't have another one all year long. The intervention that we do, whether it's a parent-teacher conference, whether it is a think sheet, whether it is a mediation, whatever we do the first time works. And that's wonderful, that's great. It's when it doesn't work and that relationship is broken and somehow not healed that we end up having issues. So in terms of volume, we looked at those incidents, and if you could give me the next slide, and we found, not surprisingly, that the vast majority of those incidents actually fell in what we call level 1, right? Which is disrespectful conduct, inappropriate personal property, skipping class, tardiness. So when we are looking at what is driving the majority of our discipline, they're in level 1. So breaking it down even further, and if you could give me the next slide. On the left, we went, and when I say we, you know, I mean Dr. Ebersol, because he is my hero in terms of breaking down data, and looked at exactly what it was that teachers and principals were disciplining students for. Because at the end of the day, some of discipline is about power dynamics, right? Who has the power to set in a class what the rules are, how you should behave? Your parents or guardians have that power at home, and at school, it's teacher or classroom aide. So when we looked at the discipline broken down, by far, the number 1 category across the board, disruptive, disrespectful conduct. And what's a little difficult about that is what is disrespectful in your house might not be disrespectful in mine. And what's disrespectful to my English teacher may not be disrespectful to my math teacher. And so it's one of those areas that there is a lot of room for there to be subjective ideas about whether or not I think you are being disrespectful to me. And therein lies a lot of issues around power dynamics, lies a lot of issues around racial disparities, lie a lot of issues around socioeconomic differences with children in poverty who may have different ways of expressing themselves, or as Ms. Dallas Lewis likes to say, different ways of knowing and doing. So we went, and then when we had the conversations with the students, we asked, so from the other side of it, from their perspective, what do you see as being the big discipline issues? Where do you think we need to concentrate in schools? Well, from the kids, they had a slightly different perspective. Kids had 3 things that they said were prevalent and were disruptive and worried them the most about discipline: bullying, fighting, racial slurs. the things that they said that happened the most, that were the most concerning to them. And when you think about it, for those kids, disrespect, disruptive conduct, they may have different ideas of that themselves, but the bullying, fighting, racial slurs, those are things that affect them individually as students. And so they are very invested in those three areas as having a huge impact on them, right? So when we were looking at potential solutions, we determined to look at some of what they felt like were the contributing factors to these things. And so actually right now I'd like to call up Miss Cassandra Wells, who is one of our exemplary teachers at Driftwood Elementary School and one of the many staff people that we had who came and worked with us on this project. If you could go to the next slide. And she is going to talk to you about a few of these contributing factors from the perception of the staff, parents, and students that we interviewed.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Cassandra Halston Wills. I am a Jefferson County Public School teacher as well as a parent. I have been attending some of the meetings and having some of the discussions and listening to some of the concerns of students and families in our community. I don't want to go through the whole list, but I'll read some of them. So the ones that particularly stood out to me are reduced opportunities to practice positive social emotional management in a school setting, adults ignoring behaviors that they feel ill-equipped to manage. I can understand that. However, sometimes you have to address the elephant in the room, even if it's uncomfortable. Adults who do not believe that effective action will be taken if they report the behavior. That one is one that I see as a staff member and I've heard as a parent. Lack of trusted adult relationships in school, and student distrust that adults will keep them safe. Those are the ones that stand out to me the most because, as I said, I've seen some of these things happening and I've experienced it. My main reason for wanting to address these issues is I'm speaking as a woman, a Black woman. It's hard to navigate in certain spaces of life being a woman of color. So when I hear that or see that there is pause in how to assist our Black and brown students, it is upsetting, but not in a way that angers me. It's upsetting because I find it to be hurtful. And if me as a 46-year-old woman can feel hurt or unseen or ignored, I can only imagine what a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old or a middle schooler will feel like. It's important that our teachers get to know all of their students. And it's specifically for these kinds of reasons, because if you don't know who you're teaching, if you don't know who your audience is, how are you going to educate them, much less discipline them? If you understand a child's situation at home, that it may not be a safe place or a quiet place, then school is where they come to find their solace as well as their education. But if they're not being seen, or if they don't felt seen or heard, how do we help them? That's where the discipline becomes a problem, because if you already don't feel heard, are you gonna whisper? Are you gonna speak softly? No, you're gonna act out. It's just like a child having a tantrum. I feel that we have to do better in terms of addressing the needs of our students, and that may take understanding what that is. Being a student of color, you already are navigating through the world with the trauma, lots of traumas. I can walk past even other women and have seen people clenching purses or not even say hello. But the person who doesn't look like me that's behind me will get greeted with a smile. So imagine again, at 46, almost 47, I've navigated through these systems all my life. When a child who looks like me, and I can even say my child, when she comes to school and she doesn't feel heard, she doesn't feel seen, she doesn't feel safe, the learning doesn't happen. Then when you go look for help, you're not heard. How do you learn? Because that's another trauma. We don't want to keep traumatizing our children. So I urge that we consider these needs and really take the steps to help our kids, because they're kids. No matter what color, they're kids. And if they don't feel safe now, we're just going to impact them with more trauma. Then that makes them traumatized adults who don't know how to navigate through life. So this is why I'm here, because I am urging that we address these issues. We look at it for what it is, and we need to be transparent, because at this point, blaming and finger pointing is not what we need. What we need is to really consider our students and what is going to make them better scholars, to then make them better citizens, so that they can be the best versions of themselves that they can be. And so that's it. I thank you, and I hope that helped.
Help me. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So, as you can see, there are a lot of different factors at play here, right? We have, as often is the case, we have a lot of people who may have positive intent, but they don't necessarily have all of the information. We also have a lot of folks who are struggling every day to do the best that they can with the tools that they have that are limited in terms of meeting needs. So there are a number of issues to address from the parent perspective, from the student perspective, and from the teacher perspective. I'm not going to sit here and give you some false idea that we're going to come up with some magical solution to this, but we do have a number of ideas about moving forward and helping improve several of these things. So I want to, one of the people that I've been very grateful for during this process, and there are many, Dr. Kramer Jefferson has worked through this process side by side, and I want to call her up to talk about some of the suggestions for addressing these issues that we've looked at through research. So, Dr. Kramer Jefferson.
Thank you. Good evening. Can you hear me okay? I'm Kate Kramer Jefferson. I'm the facilitator of Student Access and Support, part of Social and Emotional Development, and it's a privilege to be here this evening. Thank you. Next slide, please. In terms of what we may want to look at based upon those perceived contributing factors, one suggestion would be looking at restorative practices, and terms are used interchangeably at times. You may hear restorative justice, restorative discipline, but all of it really is part of a framework. And what that framework does is its goal is to focus on healing harm over punishing behavior. So it's focused on resolving conflict and the opportunity to repair harm if harm has been done. Additionally, it's looking at principles of individual accountability, fairness, and shared decision-making for all that would be involved. So that typically would include the person who's caused the harm, the person or people who have been harmed, as well as witnesses to that harm. The practices are typically focused on dialogue, community, as well as components of social and emotional learning. It's best to have a multi-tiered approach that would include a review of data, ongoing professional development and training for teachers, staff, all of those that would be involved in this process, ongoing assessment, and monitoring. So this restorative approach and a restorative framework is one where the work is really just getting started at the implementation phase. This is constantly being assessed, determining how things are going, what might need revision, and changing. It really is a transformation of a school community. We want buy-in from all involved. This is really changing the climate of a school. It's looking to align values, climate, practices, policies, and engaging all of our community members, teachers, staff, administration, students, and families and parents. In terms of best practice or promising practice models, some are listed, and it is a very small sample of options and practices that are out there. There is a real variety in what schools offer in terms of restorative approaches across the United States. Some are focused on specifically reducing expulsion, suspension rates, and Denver Public Schools is a good example where they have made significant progress. Over 10 years, they've reduced those by 2/3. Other school systems are looking more at implementing programs like a positive behavioral intervention and support model. Many of these examples have a tiered approach where they're looking at the individual student and how to engage students and have student-led opportunities in restorative practice at those levels, as well as small group levels, and then more targeted approaches for students. Our goal, or our proposed goal, is really to find the model and the approach that fits with the values that best align with Jefferson County schools in our community. So while these are just a sample of some of the practices that are out there, our goal is really to find what will work best for our students, for our teachers, and for our community. Thank you.
So in addition to, and we're going to talk about some of the restorative practices in a little bit more detail, in addition to looking at restorative practices, if you could go to the next slide, please. One of the things that we talked about was, one of the things that we talked about was an expansion of our responsive education programs as well. Right now, we have an Opportunity Learning Center where students who don't function well in a larger school go to a very small setting. They receive individual counseling, they receive group counseling and therapy, they do community service. It is a very warm, welcoming place. You've seen presentations by them. Currently, their return rate, meaning students who go through their program and then successfully finish out their school time at their home school, is over 90%. They've been enormously successful. But at their current location, they can take less than 15 students a year. It's just a very, very small facility. So one of the things that we are exploring and hope to come back to the board with in March is expansion of that program into a larger space with additional staff. We believe that we've identified some places where we can move some staff into that program, and we are working on getting a proposal to the board for a larger space that would allow us to expand it significantly for students who need that. We also are discussing developing a larger trauma program at our elementary level. We currently have a trauma program at elementary and at middle. However, they are very small. They are intensive to staff. And we're looking at different models where we could take more students into that. Another thing that is a response to what was perceived as an issue is an explicit social emotional curriculum. meaning beginning at elementary school, we don't simply rely on society to teach kids social emotional regulation skills. Now, in some families, that happens well. Their kids are well taken care of. They have good relationship. And in some, those kids don't get anywhere near the same opportunities, and we need to be the ones that give them the opportunity. That is an important piece for us moving forward. Another important piece that the teachers brought to us, particularly, this isn't an issue as much at elementary, but at secondary, they had some very real concerns about our appeal process. Currently, if there is discipline and it is appealed, the student returns to school during the appeal as soon as the next day, and several teachers felt that was they had significant concerns regarding both safety and messaging to other students. So they asked that be one of the suggestions for addressing it. Next slide, please. One of the very important pieces that we felt like needed to come out of here as well is a district-wide, clear, commitment to an explicit zero-tolerance policy for any form of racial slurs, racial harassment. As you heard from Ms. Wills, it is vitally important that every child in our care feels seen and heard. We have been, Ms. Dallas Lewis and Ms. Katie Hillman have put together a training for teachers on classroom management and have included sections on it in cultural responsiveness and awareness so that our staff have a greater awareness of all of their students and how they might respond and how they might better support them if they have any cultural differences. We've also been meeting with Dr. Howard Bostick and our principals in a series of meetings talking about perceptions, talking about how we can widen our lens in terms of the people that we interact with every day and find ways to connect with them and have relationship. As we'll talk in a little bit, relationship is the all-important foundation that we need for any of this to work. And so one of the relationships that I have valued greatly is that of the parents who have come forward and been willing to work through this process and have some painful conversations. So I'd like to invite Mr. Alawahu up here to talk to you a little bit about some of the concerns of the parents and some of the things that they hope will arise from this process.
Thank you, Dr. Gibson, and good evening. My name is Bright Alawuru. I'm a consigned parent. I have a son that's gifted as in 7th grade. It's unfortunate, during the fall, we had another kid use a racial slur against him. And the kid repeated it multiple times, and the classroom got arose, and everybody, it was all over the place. The teacher tried to calm the kids. He eventually successfully sent out the kid to the principal's office. And then eventually he sent my kid to the principal's office. My kid went, and they asked my kid to write a statement. He wrote a statement, and they sent him away. Nobody asked my kid how he felt. And that was it. An hour later, my son and that same kid they were on the hallway. The opportunity continued. This time, the same kid repeated it a second time. And the teacher heard, and what the teacher said was, the other kid didn't even know what they were talking about. So this time, they separated them. It was almost the end of class, and they sent them home. Nothing was done. I waited a week. I went to the school. I met with the administrators, and the administrator was not aware there was a second altercation. They had to go look at the camera to figure out what actually happened. And when I listen to what Dr. Gibson is saying, why we need to have a zero tolerance, it is obvious that not everybody on the same page. Everybody, so like you said earlier on, a lot of times that's not an issue in certain households. It's imperative that the school system define a zero tolerance policy to the staff so that everybody knows, so that the parents, when they send the kids to the school, they need to know what will be tolerated and what's not. I was able to work with the school administrator, and they ended up doing the right thing at the end, but I had to come to the school. If you stand back and look at what's happening across this country today, is that opportunity, kids are going to be kids. They're going to do whatever they have to do. But as adults, as educators, how we address issues at its infancy determine if this opportunity escalates. You see what happened in other schools. The reason why this stuff keep happening is because we don't have a process to address them initially. Nobody asked my kid how he felt. He was asked 7 days later how he felt. Some kids don't take it seriously. And I think we need to do something in addressing this stuff. I think things are getting worse in this county. We need to do something about it. And I'm pleading you guys to really look at it and try to approve some of these recommendations that Dr. Gibson is recommending to you guys. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. So again, I think you hear a recurring theme that part of this, a big part of this is about relationship and about having the tools to build relationship with everyone in your care, whether you have the same background as them or not, racially, religiously, socioeconomically, while at the same time recognizing, and I will certainly be the first one to say, teachers have very difficult jobs. I understand that. They are tired, they're overwhelmed. We're going to talk a little bit about where they're at and what we think they need for support. And at the same time, our obligations remain. So we have to find a way to both support them and to make sure that we hold to our standards in terms of relationships with kids. So one of the final recommendations coming out of this is looking at additional day treatment options for students with disabilities. As you know, Mr. Wink had been working closely with the State Department in an attempt to allow us to develop a day treatment facility in the county rather than outside of the county to meet the needs of some of our students with disabilities who have more intensive behavioral issues. We received in writing from the State Department that the only condition under which they would allow that is if we placed the day treatment facility inside of a school, inside of an existing school with general education students. Right now, we do not have a space to do that. That may be something that we have to look at when we finish the new schools and we are redistricting and having some movement. Since we got that ruling, we've been taking a step back and trying to figure out another way to do that. But okay, so next slide. So when we talked about being responsive to these needs, there are several things, particularly with restorative practices, that we looked at. We looked at separating the developmental levels, creating a menu of restorative practices. So I want to be clear, and we've had to repeat this several times for folks. None of this replaces the West Virginia Code. We have the safe and secure schools. Nothing in this replaces that. This simply is additional options for our staff to address some of these issues in the restorative practices menu. It also includes us training teachers on establishing effective, respectful relationships with students of widely varying backgrounds. We have already begun that work. With the support of the board, we hope to move that forward much more extensively. Some of these are things from the students in terms of creating a more extensive and compelling system of positive recognitions, particularly the secondary students, middle and high school. We're clear that there weren't always a lot of incentives for them to ignore some of the darker sides of their natures. And they wanted us to explore having more positive recognitions. Teachers, students, and parents alike talked about the immediacy of consequences, not waiting for a week to address something. We also, and it is, I don't have a slide for you separate on this, one of the things that we did with parents and with staff is we set up a response protocol, much like you just heard, where we would do training with teachers to walk them through the idea that when there's harm done, it's not that there's a perpetrator and there's a victim and it's always that clean. It is often, there is a lot behind that. And you need to check with all parties to see what harm has been done and to make sure that you establish that regardless of those actions, those are our children. They are wanted children. They are loved children, even when they come with some serious baggage. And really set in place restorative practices that even if we have to do something that removes a child from a setting, there are ways to do that where it is not a rejection of that student as a person. It is also important, and this isn't something we do very well always, is that you're welcomed back into that classroom and back into that circle in a way that is supportive, in a way that lifts you up and makes sure that you understand, although harm was done, we can heal from that, and that you're wanted and valued in that classroom. To their point, we should always, how are you doing? How did that make you feel? How can I help? Do you feel safe? What can I do to help you feel safe in this situation? Those are important things for us to have programming in place to address. So, next slide. The one thing that we heard overwhelmingly from the staff was, and we'll talk about, some were for, some were against some of these things, understandably. But all of them were very, very clear. If you are going to give us another set of options for addressing this, you have got to give us another set of hands. You cannot ask us to make changes to our classroom management or engage in these positive restorative practices without giving us some help to do it. A lot of the feedback that we got that was concerning from the staff were, I cannot do one more thing for you. I cannot. So some of this empathy gap that Ms. Wills is speaking of are from exhausted people who are understandably wary of being asked to do more. And so one of the things that we said is if we are going to make changes, we need to make sure that we have the funding and the staffing to support these. One of the things that did come out of this was that secondary teachers, mostly high school, but also middle school, were overwhelmingly not in favor of starting implementation of the restorative practices at the upper grades. They felt like that was something that would not be well received. I think we still have in, especially several of our secondary, especially high school, a mindset that they are big and they're responsible for themselves and that they should simply be dealt with more strictly. And if they were, some of these problems would go away. That they are being coddled, or that this kind of approach is soft. So again, I understand those sentiments. I understand if you've been a high school teacher, you served in a high school class, and somebody stands up and tells you to F off and flips over a desk and walks out, you don't necessarily want to hear about how you're supposed to be restoring relationship. And, I get that. And that does need to be respected. They have to be able to keep their classrooms and their students safe. So what you're seeing throughout this process is we have folks with very different needs, and we're trying to get them all to move towards each other in some way, right? So several of the suggestions that you will see for restorative practice is for us to look at elementary implementation, so kids start learning those social emotional supports early. Also for us to look at support staff, particularly at middle and high school, to implement some of these practices, training for teachers on looking at culturally responsive differences and how we become the kind of system where we do have trust, where you can send your child to school every day and trust beyond a shadow of a doubt that even if something happens, there was positive intent and that you'll be able to work through it and come out on the other side with stronger relationship. Right now, not everyone in our community has that trust, and we have to work to restore it. So next slide, please. So if we're going to make some changes, some of the things, and this is actually from the Harvard Business School, and much thanks to Ms. Dallas Lewis for the mind map. And it basically talks about how you change a system. And at the top, certainly just what I'm doing to you right now, I'm talking about policies. We're talking about how to change things that people do. We're talking about putting the money and the staff into it to make it happen. And in some ways, that's the tip of the iceberg. That's the explicit things. That's what a lot of folks do because they want to see something happen. At the end of the day, the only way we're going to actually get some change in the system is if we change the relationship. What underlies every bit of that is that if I am a teacher and you know that I care about you, you know that I talk to your mama, you know that even if I have to be hard on you about something, it is in nothing but love. And the minute after I'm hard on you, I'll be the first one to lift you up. That relationship is what undergirds everything else, no matter what I put on paper. And below that, at its very, very core, in order for those relationships to work, we have got to change some mental models about what it means to be in school, what the power dynamics between teachers and students are, how we show up in the world, how we respect parents and their desire to be involved. Again, it is complicated. It is hard work. No policy, no words on a piece of paper are going to change all of those things. But us being aware that they need to change and putting those things in place, we should get better all the time. We should continually be getting better. We should put things out in front of us to say this is where we want to be and hold ourselves accountable for moving in that direction. So next slide, some of the things, I put on here some of the things that we're doing at each one of those levels to try to address them. In terms of the mental models, we do need to educate a lot of stakeholders on restorative practices. We do. And we, at the top, we need to give them some staff support and resources to be able to do that, so they don't feel that it's one more thing that they have to pick up on their own. We do need to increase the spaces and the ways in which we have collaborative input on these issues. These parents, and many more besides who aren't here tonight, spent hours and hours talking to me about their experiences, listening to one another, talking through things that we could do differently, not because they're here to tear things down. They're not. They just want their kids happy. They want them safe. They want to be a part of the solution. And we have to find safe, consistent ways to keep those conversations going so these kids are jointly cared for by the school and by the parents. Okay. So next slide. One of the things that you will see when we talked about restorative practices, what's up there right now is what's on the West Virginia Department of Education's discipline, like menu of sorts, for having a fight. Remember, kids said bullying, fighting, racial harassment. So theirs is just if you get in a fight and there wasn't an injury, any of those strategies listed, principal can use. From kindergarten to the 12th grade, anything from a student conference to expulsion. They're all there, just in one big lump, just pick and choose. And so one of the points of restorative practice was for us to look at a more nuanced view and give some feedback on how we would like for students to be worked with when they have an issue like this in a restorative, positive way. And the parents spent a lot of time looking at these. And so I'd like to call another parent up here right now, Ms. Twyford, to talk about some of the work that they did on this.
Hello, I'm Ricky Twyford. I am a Charlestown City Council member. I am on the local school improvement council for 3 of our schools. And the principal of one of those schools nominated me to be part of the Parent Senate, to be part of this exciting potential change. And so I'm very happy at the opportunity to participate. So thankfully, I don't have any experience with school discipline, but I have seen firsthand how exhausted our teachers and our administrators are. And I think that is really important to me. As we sat down to discuss this, that was first and foremost in my mind, is we need to make sure that the program works. As the daughter of a 30-year retired police officer, I certainly see the value in punitive justice. I get that. I even went to school. I was a criminal justice major, so I was, exposed to rehabilitation practices, and then I became a mom. And now, of course, I absolutely see the value in restorative justice as well. And I know that Dr. Gibson-Learn already mentioned it, but this is adding options. So not just saying that everything has to be according to what was on her screen, 2 slides ago. This offers additional options. So if you can put it back on the screen so everyone can see it. Maybe there it is. Next slide, please. Okay, so what we did is we tried to come up with a menu. Again, these are additional options in conjunction with what's already out there, including OSS and ISS, which is used a lot, but that takes the child out of the learning environment. So we tried to come up with some other options. So I just wanted to highlight a few of them, and I think it's in your packets and you can see it on the screen. But for example, for elementary, we added writing a letter of apology. And that's a great social skill to learn for later in life. To be able to say to the person that you wronged, I'm very sorry and I won't do it again, is something that's great for that age, for sure. Then looking at, let's say, middle school, we added community service hours. One thing to mention is that when you get to the middle school column, the intent is that in addition to West Virginia State Code, anything that's in the elementary column is an option, but then also anything that is in the middle school column. So in middle school, we thought that community service projects, giving back to our community is another great skill for these kids to learn. And then for high school, something like the addition of an adult mentor. Maybe that's what's missing for a kid. That's what they need. So why not give them the option of, adding to their life instead of taking them out of the environment that they're in? So one of the other things that we really liked, to go back to the middle school column, we put in there a change in placement to alternative and virtual education. I felt like, not just me personally, but a lot of us felt like getting the parents involved and saying, okay, you're going to have to become the teacher now if we can't get this straightened out, was something that could be overlooked in the current practices. So that would add to it. And then what we really liked was being able to tell somebody who was on the quote unquote victim side of a situation, one of these things was done. To have this menu that says, I don't need to give you the details of what we did to the aggressor, for lack of a better term, but we can tell you it was handled in this way. One of these things was done. So I think that's really important. I know there was some talk about this being a lot of extra work, especially at a higher level, and I can completely empathize with that. I understand, but I think our kids are worth it. So putting in that extra effort is good. And I just wanted to say one last thing as far as having this breadth of options. So when my first child got to middle school, my eyes were as big as saucers. I heard about, the kids saying nasty things to teachers, walking out of class, flipping over desks. Not like it was a regular thing, but I did hear that it happened, and I thought, oh, that's it. Bring the hammer down. That can't happen. You need a place to learn where it's safe and quiet and secure. Well, the other day, one of my kids was really frustrated by something that another kid was doing to him, and his response was to pound on the lunch table. He was just so mad he didn't know what else to do. And you're not allowed to pound on the lunch table, and that was disruptive for sure. He definitely shouldn't have done that. But kudos to his teacher, who was in charge of lunch that day, who pulled him aside and said, that is so not like you, what's going on, and was able to really take a look at his social and mental status at the time and say, okay, this isn't a quote unquote, bad behavior because you're a bad kid, but there's something else going on here. So I know that our teachers have the ability to do this, but I think right now they just don't feel like they have the bandwidth. So hopefully adding options to what they can do is a positive and not a detraction. All right, that's it. Thanks.
Thank you very much, ma'am. And what she described is exactly what we hope for from the best of our teachers, and quite frankly, what hundreds of them give every single day, okay? I don't want anyone walking away from here with the impression that we have a broken staff that we need to, quote unquote, fix somehow. We certainly can get better at a lot of things, and some of the empathy and the care that was shown to Ms. Twyford's son is exemplary, and it needs to be ubiquitous, right? That is our mission, that level of care and concern. And let me question first before I jump to conclusions. That needs to be done with every single child. So next slide. So some of the obstacles to actually doing that are, and you've heard, the adults in the situation are pretty exhausted. And, there's always going to be a generational divide. So social mores change a lot faster as we get older, and there's always going to be a gap between, the way we did things when we were in school and the way kids do things now. And we have to make some adjustments for that. At the same time, we have seen increases in aggressive behavior on the part of students, just their frustration levels, their unwillingness to engage in school in the same way they might have pre-pandemic, and teachers who are exhausted and frustrated trying to manage a classroom. And I can tell you from having been out subbing on Wednesdays, the struggle is real. You have 25 kids in there, and if one of them is just determined that you are not moving forward, then guess what? You're not moving forward. So there has to be some balance and recognition of that as well. Lack of resources is a very, very real issue for all of these therapeutic services we're talking about. In terms of the racial issues that we have, that is a very emotionally charged issue for people. For us to be able to have a conversation about it in ways that aren't divisive and that are well-intended and meaningful takes a lot of work, and it takes a lot of trust that still needs to be built. The West Virginia Code, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that, is not necessarily adaptive. That West Virginia Code for discipline is more than a decade old and has not been revised in some time. Okay, next slide. So there were things about implementing this that folks wanted to make sure were heard. Parents want to be very involved in the process. They want to be provided more information. We talked about a ticketing system, exactly as she said, where when you reported something, we would give you something like a discipline receipt that says, my name is the administrator. I cannot tell you, because confidentiality laws, what exactly was done, but I can promise you something off of this menu was done, so that because oftentimes if someone sees that kid in class the next day, they just assume nothing happened. You may have required them to go to counseling. You may have made them go through a threat assessment. They may be doing community service hours after school. But if you see them sitting in the desk, there's the assumption nothing happened. And so we have to work through that, because quite frankly, that's a trust issue too. So some of this is changing relationships so we have some trust. Teachers very much want to be understood in terms of they are under an enormous amount of pressure to get these scores up, to get kids who are very far behind back on track and on grade level. So for them to push that kind of academic pace, they are under the gun to do that. And it is very difficult to do when you have someone being disruptive, repeatedly disruptive in your class. So that needs to be honored in how we do that. So students want to feel that the adults are able to provide a safe environment with no repercussions. We heard from students about their concerns about quote unquote snitching and then not being protected. And several of the groups suggested running pilots before full-scale implementation. So next slide. There are, and I don't expect anybody to read this, there are some interesting developments at the state level as well that folks need to keep their eyes on. Right now, we're not the only system having this issue. We are certainly, from what I understand from the State Department, one of the only school systems that's having this broad and open a conversation about it right now. Legislators have been hearing from teachers about their frustration. They have been seeing the numbers on discipline. And one of the bills that has been introduced is House Bill 2890. And it is basically a response to teacher concerns that, and I am going to simplify it a great deal, but you can go and read the entire thing. Essentially, a teacher sends a kid out of class because they're disruptive. They have 24 hours to document it. The child cannot return to class for the rest of the day. That's considered an in-school suspension. When they hit 3 in-school suspensions, it's out of school or alternative ed, period. So I understand the sentiment. I understand frustrated, overwhelmed staff who aren't getting planning periods, who have large class sizes, who are dealing with behaviors. This is a hammer. I think it has the potential to be very harmful depending on how it's implemented. I certainly think that there are ways that we could be more supportive of teachers when someone is disruptive and they need them to be out of the classroom for a while, but dictating this in the very strict way that it's written right now, I think would be very, very difficult to implement. There's not a school system in this state that has an alternative or responsive ed program big enough to hold as many kids as would be booted out of school in this. It also has a provision in there for a teacher protection of sorts. Again, one of the things you saw listed earlier was a very litigious environment in terms of people being quick to talk about their lawyers if there's any conflict and they disagree with the outcome of that conflict. I've had a lot of appeals this year. I've had to write no trespass letters this year for folks who came into the school to disagree with their child's discipline, and you very quickly saw where it came from. So, teachers being in that atmosphere, again, I understand their concerns, and I understand that legislators want to be responsive to them. This is not the answer, quite frankly. And I think that there are certain marginalized populations, ESL students, our Black and brown students, our low-income students, who would be disproportionately harmed if this was to go through. So next slide. So short term, we are certainly, before we can, we plan to bring policy changes back to you for your putting them out for public comment and a vote. We will be bringing you a proposal for some restorative practices. We will be bringing you a proposal for training for staff in terms of being culturally responsive. We will be bringing you a budget proposal for expansion of OLC, high needs programs, trauma programs. And then, next slide. And then long term, we have some work for the Special Education Advisory and Discipline Advisory Committees and parent education programs and support to expand those. So again, this is not going to be a one-shot deal, but I have to commend the people who have been so thoughtful about putting their time and effort into this, in the belief that we're willing to try. We're willing to put ourselves out there to try, and it'll be a bumpy road, but I think that we will be a better system for it at the other end. So we're not asking for any action tonight. We're just letting you know the progress of all of many, many hours of hard work on the part of these families and teachers and students, quite frankly, in the hopes that we get better. So thank you.
Thank you for the presentation and all of the hard work that you and the committee have put into this. Do any board members have any questions?
I have some questions.
Sure.
Will you be waiting for the disciplinary committees that are forming to advise on this policy that you plan to bring back to the board?
We have some policies that we would like to introduce in the short term, and then others that we think will have also have greater impact for that discipline committee as well. Yes, ma'am. Some of the zero tolerance on the racial slurs and the appeals process, those are things that the teachers and the parents have said they believe needs to be done now, quickly.
And will you be waiting for the state to update the code? Because it sounds like it could happen
That's a
soon.
Again, that's a very good question, ma'am. We could certainly bring, what I am hoping is that we will bring you back in March, suggestions for action. My thought is that if 2890 gets to crossover day, as you well know, ma'am, the House and the Senate, and then if it has enough support to cross over to the other side, we'll know that we're dealing with something that could be disruptive. But you always, as a board, have the option to give staff other options in addition to, if they do pass the worst case scenario of this, then we'll have to sit down with the discipline committee and the State Department and see what wiggle room we have. But I would be horribly disappointed if that passed in the same format that it's in right now.
I don't see anything here about the establishment of an OLC program for the elementary level, and I believe it might have been Ms. Taylor Bratton that suggested that previously, and I hear from a lot of teachers at the elementary level that they feel there is a need. Is that something that's being considered?
Absolutely, yes, ma'am. I'm sorry I didn't write that out separately. The only reason that I didn't have that down, and I should have written it out separately as an option, we have the middle school, high school program already. If we are able to negotiate, and I believe that we will. I spoke to the government official who has to approve that today, and he thought that we could bring it to you in March. If we're able to get that space, the discussion was that in the large space, the new building that we think we're going to be able to get, when I say get, we're not, I won't be bringing a purchase to the board. We have a government entity who's willing to let us utilize it. Then the discussion was, would we put elementary into the current OLC building? So one of the things that we're talking through with the current OLC staff and responsive education is how much bandwidth do we have for both expanding secondary and adding an elementary program? So we may have to do that in stages. I don't want to promise anything that we don't have the manpower to do yet. But yes, ma'am, that is on the docket for us to do.
Okay, when I got responses from the high school when the restorative practices were presented to them, several contacted me very upset, and so I agree that they were not supportive of the idea. And the biggest complaint I heard was that they were told that coaches would be hired to come in and train, and the way they see it is more money put out for something else, that's just one of the issues. But if you can find all these coaches, why aren't these people being hired as teachers? And that was just one of the arguments. The other I recall was that they left with hearing that you're going to have kids fighting, and then they just have to write an apology letter. I know that you have more listed here, but I think that that's what some of them came away with, because that's what they came to me with.
Absolutely, yes, ma'am. And I appreciated that the faculty senate chairs, we asked them to take it to the staff for feedback, and they gave us, again, I have that same spreadsheet with all of those, and they were very honest with us. Yes, they if we had all of this extra staff to throw at it, put them into teaching so that they had smaller class sizes and that they had more bandwidth to deal with them. Certainly that is part of the issue and the concern. And we never had a discussion about, and again, people, they imagine what something's going to be like, and I think they project sometimes. What we had stated is that if restorative practices were something that the board felt like would be meaningful moving forward, that we would have to have staff who would be responsible for some of those practices, not necessarily just to coach and train the teachers on how to do them, but to be the ones who actually offered mediation to students, who actually worked through community service with them, who did that work, because teachers told us that that was exactly it. Even if they were supportive, they didn't have the bandwidth. Would we be hiring someone else to do that?
Well, and then just an idea that I thought of, if it came to that, they're being given the $300 to take online classes. Couldn't that be something developed where they were paid to take one of these trainings? The other part, I mean, that is that I think I recall them saying that they felt like this was the administrator's job to deal with discipline, and why is it now being put on them to handle discipline? So, and they also felt that there's already a lack of discipline, and that this would be even a bigger lack of discipline. That's, so I don't understand why the teachers are the ones that have to be trained. Aren't the administrators the ones that ultimately handle the discipline? Because it's left up to them to decide, but so why is this, why are teachers, what is their involvement in this program?
So when you say program, restorative
Or
restorative
your new
practices is...
whatever you develop, that concerns especially the secondary staff. I think part of it was the restorative practices, but the overall plan that was in these charts about the different stages, what the treatments for the different age groups, it just seems that it would be more of an administrator issue than teachers. I mean, teachers write the referral, that's all they can do. I mean, so what is it that you're asking that's different of teachers?
Well, that's a good question. So at secondary, you are entirely correct. We did get an enormous amount of concern that this would be less discipline and that it would result in more behavioral issues, and we hear that. And there, in terms of the decision about what the end, discipline, punishment, consequence does lie with the principal. They're the ones who get to decide that. But the person who decides whether or not a kid is being removed from a classroom because their behavior is somehow upsetting or disrespectful to you is the teacher, right? So
No, teachers don't make that decision. I mean, they can ask, but the administrator will bring them right back and say, no, Johnny's going to be here, whether you like it or not. I mean, that's an administrative decision.
So, Dr. Joy, what I am saying is that the teacher is the one in the classroom. When you are speaking to me or Lori is speaking to me and I perceive that you are being disrespectful or that you are engaging in some sort of misconduct, I'm the one who decides whether or not it's something that I tolerate or I send you out of the class. Now, an administrator may overrule me and come back or put the kid back in, but ultimately, what starts the discipline process is the teacher. So we're not talking about coming in and making teachers responsible for discipline. We are talking about giving teachers more options than what they have now if they think that there should be a different type of discipline, right? Administrators more options, and working with teachers and providing training that says, here is the range of things that you're going to see from kids. If we can give you some more tools in your tool belt about how you interact with those kids, about the relationship that you have with those kids, because we all know There are some teachers that they can teach for 5 years and not send 2 kids out of their classroom, and you've got teachers, and you know them, have worked with them, who'll send 3 kids a day out of theirs. So what we have to do is to work with those teachers on how they interact with students, how they come to find their strengths, how they work with their parents. So again, we're not putting the discipline onto the teacher. We are holding the teacher accountable for relationships, and some of them have that already. Some of them, that's their gift, but the ones that it's not, we have some work to do.
That makes sense.
Thank you.
The numbers that you gave for discipline, are those based on referrals, or where do those numbers come from?
Those numbers come from WEVIS. Those are the administrators. When a child is sent to the Office for Discipline, the building administrator is responsible for putting them into the West Virginia Education Information System, and we pull the reports out of that.
So it's referrals sent to the office? And
Yes, ma'am.
why isn't bullying listed as a zero tolerance in your goals?
That's a good question. We certainly can. We certainly can.
So another couple questions. I appreciate that you met with members of the Black community, and I'm just wondering, have you also, or do you intend to meet with the Hispanic community?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, is that part of the plan?
Well, right now, we don't have a separate parent group, but we can certainly approach that group of parents for their interest and involvement as well. Happy to do that.
I think this is my last question. I taught for almost 30 years, and the biggest deterrent for behavior was having the parents accountable, having them come up, and also having students stay after school, especially high school students. And I don't know what happened to that, if there's a law that says they can't stay after school, but many students do not want to have to stay after and miss the bus and have to get a ride home and miss practice and miss time with their boyfriend or girlfriend. Is that a part of this? I didn't see it, but does that factor?
That is one of the options, yes, ma'am. I will say that it is not a frequent option that our schools use, simply because for families that don't have transportation, you can't tell them to stay after school and then not get the kid home. So for us to be able to run a bus for a separate bus for after school isn't something that we've had the transportation bandwidth to do. At the high school, they have had Saturday detention before. Again, that's for kids whose parents are willing to transport them. So part of what we've talked about, when we talked about resources, one of those resources would have to be transportation for those kids. Now we do, this year, we have added for each one of the high schools an activity van. So we have a transportation option that we have not previously had. So that may play into their being able to use that more frequently.
Okay, Dr. Gibson, are you finished? Dr. Joy? Okay, Dr. Gibson, just
Yes, ma'am.
a couple of things.
Yes, ma'am.
So I know we, in speaking about, one thing is wanting to revise the current appeal process. So I just want to give 2 examples of why that's probably not the best idea, because some of the discipline that's given is unfairly from the beginning. So I spoke with a family who has a student that goes to one of our high schools, and last year this student was given 19 days out of school because he was racially bullied. The parents sent a letter to the principal. The principal dismissed the whole appeal. So the parents weren't comfortable with going further. So what happened with this child, that had to serve the 19 days out of school, eventually he became really depressed. And so now this child his parents sought medical attention for him. So this child is now, not only was he unfairly put out of school, and then he became severely depressed. Now he's on medication, and it's just not a good thing for him. So that's one instance. Mm-hmm. There's a middle school instance where we have a child who was being racially bullied, and this child fought, and this child was put out of school, but his parents went through the appeal process, and he was put back in school. But this child, actually, it was completely out of his character to do this. So this is why I really don't think that revising the appeal process so that students have to stay out of school might not be in our best interest, because who's the aggressor? Who decides who the aggressor is, right? So will the child that used the racial slur, will they ever be considered the aggressor? What happens when a child has been racially harassed and then they respond? They're given days out of school, right? Mm-hmm. So the argument is that no one steps in and helps our children of color when they just want to immediately be disciplined. No one, just like Mr. Bright said, says, "Are you okay? What can we do for you?" Okay. So, that care is not always offered. So also, how can we assist in addressing the problems of our racial mistrust? This is the type of stuff that also should be involved in the process. And also, I heard you say that we're limited in tools, right? And I understand that, but will we ever come up with more tools in assisting these matters to, to help? And that's all. That's all I had to say. If you wanted, I know I threw a lot of questions out there, but
no,
yeah.
no, I again, yes, ma'am. I hear everything that you and Dr. Joy are saying, and once again, it's complicated. And I suspect that there will be things that teachers want that parents don't, or that parents want that teachers don't, or that board members don't. And when you talk about the racial mistrust, I think there's mistrust on different levels. I think there's political mistrust. I think that there's just a history of mistrust in a whole bunch of different places. And it just, the longer you go without talking about it and trying to see things, the work we're doing with Dr. Howard Bostic, the principals have been doing, have been about, you have got to take a step back and recognize your own lens and how someone else's lens is different, right? What seems hostile to you is the result of all of these factors that you may not know or understand, but don't make assumptions from just your point of view. At least be willing to consider it. And I think that that's part of what this process has been. Hear me, see me, right? And then we can have a conversation about it. And I think we're going to be having conversations about difficult things. And as we go through it, I think trust is built when you actually stand up and say, there's a problem and we need to talk about it. I'm not shaming or blaming anybody. I'm saying we need to work on it, that we have to get better, that we owe each other that duty. And I think over time you can build that trust, but it just takes time and commitment. At one of our next principals meetings, we have a group of parents who have had negative experiences coming to speak with the principals, so that when you talk about the empathy gap, it's not that folks don't have empathy, it's that they don't have another lens. They struggle to put somebody else's lens on for a minute. A lot of times because they're stressed or they're overwhelmed or they're tired or they don't see the value of it. And that mental model is what we're working hard to try to change.
I guess I wanted to add one thing about my experience teaching in Jefferson County. I had a zero tolerance for racism and sexism and all the other isms, and I sent the students to the office, referral to the office, and 99% of the time the message to me was, Miss Joy, you know, we got more important problems here. We got Johnny down the hall fighting, so it was never, it's just a culture of not taking things like the isms seriously. So that's my personal experience.
Thank you.
Dr. Gibson-Lernick, thank you as well for all the work that you've done and those that are here that helped and add their input to it. Personally, for myself, I would say addressing the student's concern is that number one being bullying. I think that immediately there has to be, especially in light of what we see across the country, a zero tolerance for bullying and the racial harassment and slurs. I just don't think there's any place for it at all. And the second thing that I would say is at the secondary level, understanding that it's going to be very difficult and no different than being a parent of a teenager. Sometimes you just are like, just because I said so. You know, you don't have the bandwidth at whatever else is going on. And I can't imagine being a teacher today with the delays and everything that they're dealing with, as well as the increased behaviors of having just the emotional bandwidth of what's going on in their own lives to then deal with that. So I do think we do need support, but I think that as well, one of the big pieces in this that we need to address is the students, and how do we include students as part of that, whether we incorporate even in the school system at the secondary levels until we can get to that place, much like a teen court. And that if you have that zero tolerance policy, and then you have students, and we're going to train them much like they do in the teen court. You can learn those skills to defend somebody, to prosecute somebody, and how to advocate for somebody, and then helping them to go through that process to see how hurtful that can be, being able to provide, here's the evidence, here's what happened, you know, what do you think should happen? And getting them, I guess if you will, I think we're going to get further, especially at the secondary level, if we can get the buy-in from students to understand that this behavior needs to be changed. The ones that are trying to do their best, they want to work, they're tired of the disruptions, no different than the teachers, right? They're tired of the disruptions, they just want to teach. Those students, they get it, they're going to be right there trying to help out. I do think we'd get a lot of volunteers for that. But they want what's best for that other person. They don't understand them, but it would also help them to have a different lens to see, oh, now I get why that person is behaving that way, or you know, maybe there's some things I can do to help that. And that other person who is hurting and lashing out then, you know, gets to see the other side of that. So I think looking at the possibility of developing that aspect may help us to put a Band-Aid, if you will, for right now until we can gain some bandwidth there, because that, to me, is the biggest issue that's going on right now, is that secondary level. I mean, we have the trauma at the elementary level, but I don't even want to say it, but at the elementary level, they're not going to necessarily do some of the things that we've seen happen in high schools across the country who have just hit their breaking point at the high school levels. So, you know, the bullying, 100%, there's no tolerance for it. Racial slurs, there's no tolerance for it. You know, the fighting, yeah, it happens for lots of different reasons. Sometimes over a girl or a guy. Really? When they'll look back and think, really, I did that for that person? That was so not worth it. But anyway, that's the kind of stuff that we can, you know, deal with levels on. But I think that the kids have a lot to add, and I think being able to get them involved in it might be a good way to start.
Yes, ma'am. We did ask the students about peer mediation and if they would be willing to be trained in a peer mediation program and thought it would be helpful. With one exception, they uniformly said no. They did not believe that it would be helpful. They did not believe that they would have the trust in their peers, which saddens me greatly and talks about a deeper sort of loneliness, isolation issue that we have to a certain extent with kids. But that was one of the options that
But,
we asked
I
them
mean,
about.
of course, if you're mad at another human being, you don't want to be negotiating with them. You're angry. But at Jefferson, we had a wonderful program with Miss Thomas, I think, and when she left, nobody took it over, but students were forced to meet with their peers, and there was group discussions, and it seemed to be really successful. But when she left, the program dissolved.
Yes, ma'am. Like anything else, us hiring the right people to do that, it worked because you had a great person. I've heard lots of positive things about that. You have to have the right person that can build some rapport and some trust with the kids and to guide them through that process. And then it can be successful, yes. Anything else? No.
Thank you
Okay,
for putting
thank
this
you.
together, Dr. Gibson.
Yes, ma'am. You're welcome, ma'am. Thank you for letting me. There are boards who would have stopped us because they would have been afraid it would be controversial. So I appreciate that you guys are willing to wade into this, knowing that there might be some conflict over. Sometimes it's just productive struggle, right? Sometimes trouble's good trouble, and you just got to get in it. So thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have the Deputy Superintendent for Instructional Support update. Mr. Banks.
Good evening. Tonight we bring you a sample of what it looks like when our academic coaches analyze student benchmark assessment data to help support our teachers and their instructional practices. We're just sharing with you the process, and again, it's a sample, but we want you to understand how that works as part of what we do every day in our schools. In this particular case, you will hear STAR assessment mentioned, but most of it is related to the CIA, which is a comprehensive interim assessment, and it's assessed in both reading language arts as well as math. So to help describe this process in greater detail, we have a couple folks with us tonight. Tracy Brinson, one of our academic coaches, and Katie Hillman, who's our academic coach facilitator. I'll turn it over to them.
Are you going to put it on the screen? This is just, you can't read these, it's so small.
Yeah, Jason is going to put it on the screen as well.
All right. Good evening. Good to see all of you again. As Mr. Banks said, we're going to give you a snapshot of how the academic coaches use the CIA mid-year data as well as the elementary level, the STAR data. And so if you could go to the next slide, Jason. So this is just the general process that we take. First, we pull the data, so either from the CIA website, the Cambium portal, or within STAR. And then we identify the areas of strengths and weaknesses of our students on specific standards. Then we unpack those standards. We do vertical alignment of standards across grade levels. And as we work through that, then we take a look at the individual students within the classrooms and create small groups based on the student need. And then we provide support for delivering instruction to those students. Tracy's going to share what that looks like. So.
Good evening. Next slide, please. Okay. So at the beginning of the year, what I've done, or what I did, was I took the WVGSA data and I started pulling it apart. And I took the 5 standards with the lowest level of proficiency. And then I started doing like a backwards design to create vertical alignment. And after I did that, what I did is in my PLCs with the teachers, we came together and we started to unpack those standards. And what I noticed, now this is math, but what we found is with ELA, as we're diving in there and unpacking those standards, we found that the reason the ELA scores were so low is really because of our writing. So what I did is I said, okay, well, you know, we really need to focus on this, because as we were looking at the writing, the students were scoring in the 0 to 2 level, and there are a few 3s sprinkled in there, but no 4s. So the WVDE, they had sent us some resources, and so I started diving in there, and I found some exemplars with the scoring rubrics, and in the PLCs, we started looking at the exemplars with the scoring rubrics. And as we started looking at those and seeing the different essays and exemplars and saying, okay, well, why did students score this? And then it would show us, well, they scored this, and then the scoring rubric would show us, you know, how each exemplar was scored. And so the teachers were able to take that back to their classes and have discussions with their students. And then now that they've taken the CIAs, what they've done is they've printed out the students' essays, and they've cut off their names, and then they've switched with another teacher or class in their grade level, and now they are taking the scoring rubrics, and they are having conversations about, you know, how would you score this essay using the scoring rubrics. So just unpacking those standards has really been helpful for at least my teachers. Next slide.
So this is just an example of one of the tools that the coaches can use to unpack those standards. When we say unpack the standards, what we mean is really dive deep into what the standard is asking the student to be able to do. And we're looking at what that looks like and sounds like at each level, if the student is at mastery, above mastery, or below mastery. And it's important to identify activities to do with all of those students, and also identify consistent vocabulary that can be used across the board. And when we're talking about the students who are above mastery, oftentimes people might think, oh, well, they're good to go. But we also, our goal is not just to reach mastery, but to help that student grow individually. So we take a look at all of those pieces, and this is just one example of a tool that the coach can use with their teachers. And like Tracy said, when we are looking at the CIA data, and at the beginning of the year, the GSA data, we are taking a look at not only the strong areas, but especially those 5 weakest areas, and really break those down. And next up, we're going to take a look on the next slide at the STAR data.
Okay, so this is another source of data that I use with my teachers, and what you're looking at is a math report. And I really like this report. I like a lot of the STAR reports, but I like this particular report because if you're looking at it, it shows the math domain, and up underneath the math domain, it shows the actual standard, and then if you were to look up underneath that, it shows all the students, and then over onto the right, it shows the percent proficient. So teachers are able to take this particular report and build their small groups. And when I'm meeting with my teachers in PLCs, and we're breaking down this data and we're looking at it, then we're talking about you know, their small groups, as far as students need targeted, or do they need intensive intervention? But I also point out, you know, to the teachers, let's not forget about those high achievers, because our goal is to grow all students. And one thing that I do with or actually the teachers, do with the students at my school to give them ownership, because I know, it's a test, and a lot of times kids just rush through the test, but we want them to have ownership of this, so we do goal setting with them. And so at the beginning, the very first STAR test, we talk to them about where they are, where we want them to be, and so they have that ownership, and that really makes a big difference. Next slide.
So this is an example of what the CIA dashboard looks like for teachers. When they log in, they can see where it says school under there. I have that blacked out. I just typed school, but it would be the teacher's individual classroom that they can see. But as academic coaches, we are able to go in there and pull that data for our teachers and break it down for them. And this is just a screenshot, but at the top where you see those plus marks, when you click on those plus marks, it expands like you see on the right, and it breaks it down by standard. So the West Virginia Career and Content Readiness Standards are there, and it shows you how your students scored. And also, then on the very far right, it shows the level for the depth of knowledge. So that is the data that we pull for the teachers, and then we work with them to address those areas of concern. Next slide.
So this is another document that I use. I actually created this template, and this is what I consider a working document. So what it is you'll see I've taken the standards with the lowest proficiency from the vertical alignment, and then after the teachers have given this the first STAR test, we've talked about this, about which standards, as we're looking at the ones with the lowest proficiency on the STAR test, and we also add those to this document. And then I go and I figure out where these standards actually taught in the 9 weeks, which 9 weeks, and I list that. And then I also list the percentage of proficiency for those standards. And then, as I said, it's a working document, and as we go through the year and they take the middle of the year standard STAR benchmark, then I'll list that, and then of course you can see the CIA up there. Now these are, I will say, these are not real scores because I didn't want to use my school's scores for their privacy. But the goal is that they'll get at least 60%, and if they do get 60%, then I'll highlight that particular standard, and then we'll look at other standards that need a little more focus. And then you also see resources. And so what I do for teachers is I will either make resources, and I do make a lot of resources for them for those particular standards, or I'll go out and grab resources for them. And all they have to do is just click on those resources, and every teacher has one of these. And I use this year after year. So the teachers in my schools, they keep this. Next slide. This is a CIA data analysis that I've created, and this is just half of the CIA analysis. So this is math, and what I have done is I've taken the domains, so you can see those up at the top, and then I took the item number, which is the question, and below that is the standard that was tested. And then what I wanted to do is I wanted to see which standards have not been taught yet. And so what I did is I put X's there, so because I didn't want to look at those just yet. And then underneath that is the percent proficient for that particular question. And I highlighted all the ones that were 50% or below. And so when I meet with my teachers, because I haven't met with them yet, but when we meet, my goal is to actually look at the particular questions, because I really want to figure out why are the students not mastering those particular skills or standards that have already been taught. And so we can pull up the questions and we can look, and I want to see, is it because students don't understand the content, Or is it because they don't know how to manipulate the Chromebook? For example, they don't know how to drag and drop, or they have trouble dragging and dropping, or highlighting the text, or something to that effect. So that's how I'm going to use this. That's it. Thank you.
We know that was a lot in a very short time. And again, it just gives you a sample of a process that's used at our schools in Jefferson County to break down, analyze data, and then also help teachers inform instruction, including making small groups and how to focus on certain standards to improve achievement. So we'd be glad to take any questions you have.
I have some questions. Are teachers provided, are they able to do this themselves? Just go in and do the item analysis, and can they do that themselves? Because you keep saying that you do it. I'm sure it's a program that does it, but do they have access to that same program?
They do have access
Okay,
to
so
that.
they can evaluate this themselves. So your job is to come in and if they need help with something.
So what I do is I kind of take it and I condense it.
Mm-hmm.
So because it's kind of all over the place, and so I condense it for them because I try to take that time piece out, because teachers, they just don't have a lot of time to be able to go in and do things like I do. So I take that time piece out, and then I create like the spreadsheets and things like that, so that when we meet in our PLCs, we have time to really look at the data and take it apart.
You only work with elementary, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, because I'm not getting anything from secondary up here. So does the same thing happen with secondary?
So yes, the same thing happens with secondary. We have 2 secondary middle school coaches because 6 through 8 has the CIA and the GSA, where high school does not. High school, the coach at the high school, we are working towards using Mastery Connect as a program, since there is not a standardized test. I mean, there's PSATs and SATs, but that data doesn't come in time for it to be useful, so we are working towards benchmarks. However, the middle school secondary coaches, yes, they follow the same process with using the CIAs and then pulling the same type of information, looking at those standards where it's weak, and really breaking it apart in their department meetings with the different content areas.
I don't know about the lower levels, but I know at least at Jefferson, for the 8 years that I was there, we did this, we were doing this. We met as a team, and we went through the item analysis to see which problems students were missing, and then we would reteach. How is this unique? How is this new? Or what are you doing differently than what's been done?
Well, I think if you were listening to what Tracy was talking about, she's making the job of the teacher a little simpler. She's taking all that data, making some charts and graphs that allow teachers to assist them with their planning, and then more importantly, small groups, and being able to develop those small groups. Certainly a teacher can go in and look at all this data, but it is the coach's role to help support this process in the schools.
Is the coach doing this at the high school level, taking the data and presenting it for the teachers so that they don't have to go through the items?
It's a similar process across all the schools, yes.
Is a coach doing it, or how?
It can be coaches, it can be department chairs can assist. It looks a little different at every level.
So how are they doing then? How are students doing at this point? And do you have any improvement? Do you see improvement? So you've had 2 9 weeks now,
Right.
so you would have been able to compare.
We would be glad to bring some data to you at a meeting and show you where we are with our especially our CIA data, because it really mimics the GSA. The questions are very similar.
And something that I do with my teachers is I provide the resources for them. So I go out and get those resources and provide them with the resources to help them when they're teaching those standards.
Yeah, that sounds helpful. So, thank you.
I just point out, this is just a very small part of what our coaches do. They obviously support the math process in number sense. CKLA support every time there's a new adoption of materials. They are front and center in helping our teachers understand and navigate the new curriculum. Also Canvas support and classroom management. And on top of that, please don't forget that we have a lot of new teachers that come through our system, so they're constantly, along with our mentors, supporting our new teachers as well. So, other questions?
I just have one question and comment. Number one, thank you very much. I love this. I like the data. That's always fun to go back, and I think you guys have done a really good job of trying to increase that. And you know how I always push for the online portal at Mr. Banks. I'm always asking, have we started that? Have we started that? I think a long-term goal, especially since you put so much time and effort into this, Ms. Brinson as well, just to be able to have something like this as a portal, right? That every single standard of elementary and of middle especially, high school is kind of another beast, as we know, but the elementary and the middle, that every content standard, which don't change very much, you know, over the years, they may add a little bit, but not much, that we would be able to have these delineated this way, what unit it's taught in, and all those resources. And that way, if, you know, we have a new teacher and they've got, you know, they know they're getting hired or they're getting ready to start, and they can spend a few weeks before, if that's all they have, or a few days, as some of them only get a few days, to be able to go through at least, oh, let me go through month 1, 2, and 3, or month 1 even, and I pull this up. You know, I have maybe previous STAR data, but even if I don't have STAR data from the kids I'm going to get, I have every single standard, exactly what unit it's going to be in, and all of my resources, and I'm prepared and ready to go with those benchmarks from the very beginning. So I think as a long-term goal, I know you've talked about that, Mr. Banks, and as a desire to do that, but I think this is a really great example of what it would look like for a teacher to use long-term. So I applaud you guys for that. I think it's done very, very well. It can be broken apart.
Thank you.
Dave, I have a question.
Sure.
I think it's a great process, don't get me wrong, but I think STAR is a very low-level assessment, and I think that is something we need to look at over time to see if we can replace it with something that's a bit more stringent.
We have similar concerns, and that's why the CIA data is so important to us. You can never tell anything about a student based on one assessment or one snapshot. So often we use multiple assessments to make good decisions about their education. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right, up next, is there a motion to approve the amended minutes from the regular board meeting held January 23rd, 2023, and the special board meeting held February 6th, 2023?
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Ogden. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Osborne. Any discussion?
Yeah, I have concerns about the January 23rd minutes. They don't reflect that this board agreed to revisit the exam policy. It says that we would put the policy out for public comment and for the 10%. That's there, and that we would revisit that in 2 weeks, meaning we should have done that today. But we had also agreed that we would put that on the agenda to discuss changing that exam policy. That's missing from these minutes. So I make a motion to add that to the minutes. I understand that, it was supposed to be put on the agenda, but there was miscommunication. It didn't get put on the agenda. So I want to, somebody to go back and confirm, yes, it's in the minutes that we were supposed to do it, but there was an oversight, and somehow it needs to be, we need to have it a record that we are intending to meet on this. And I'm not sure how to make that happen.
I think you need to amend the minutes from the previous.
I didn't hear you.
I think you just need to amend them
Okay,
and make a motion to that effect.
yeah, well, I made a motion
I second it.
And what's the amendment?
to add that 2 weeks ago, the intention was that we would have it put on the agenda for this week to revisit the exam policy.
Okay, Ms. Ogden, would you amend your motion to that?
I would amend my motion that 2 weeks ago, Dr. Joy made a motion that Ms. Bratton seconded to request that be put on the agenda for, I don't know when, I don't remember when it was supposed to be on the agenda, but they wanted to discuss it again before the advisory committee came back.
Okay, and Mr. Osborne, will you second that motion? Thank you. All in favor of the,
Wait a minute, this is not clear. There was a motion by me, Ms. Tyler Bratton seconded, and Mr. Osborne agreed to.
I believe that the minutes do reflect, the amended minutes online do reflect that there was a vote to bring it back 3-2.
You said online?
These minutes say, following questions and discussion regarding the semester exam policy, a motion was made by Donna Joy, second by Carmen Bratton, to change the weight of the semester exam to 10% of the semester grade and put the proposed policy change out for review and comments for 2 weeks. And it says a vote was taken, it was 3-2, but it doesn't reflect the fact that we also stated that we would bring that policy back to discuss. So not only did we put it out for 2 weeks for public comment, and we were supposed to be discussing the public comment tonight, but we were also supposed to revisit the exam policy. That's missing.
All right, give me just one moment here. Thank you for your patience while I find this.
I have the recording if you want to hear it. It's at 1 hour and 40 minutes in the.
No, I don't need that. Hang on just 1 minute. I'm just looking at. All right, how about one of the amendments that was done was vote taken, motion carried 3-2. It would be vote taken to put the policy out on review and bring back at the next board meeting.
Yeah, that's all, that already says that, but we were to discuss the policy again.
Right, but it says here, vote taken, motion carried 3-2. And so it's referring to the above section that says, following questions and discussions regarding the semester exam policy, a motion was made by Donna Joy, seconded by Carmen Bratton, to change the weight of the semester exam to 10% of the semester grade and to put the proposed policy change out for review and comment for 2 weeks. So if we put vote taken to put the policy out for 2 weeks and bring it back for discussion, or bring it back for action after the policy. Okay, so we'll do vote taken to put out for review and bring back for action. Motion carried 3-2. Does that work for you?
And then it will be on the next agenda.
Yes, ma'am, and I believe it was explained to you that it was an oversight this past week.
I
And
understand
there was an
that there-
apology for that,
Right.
and it will be on the next agenda.
I understand that it was an oversight by,
I would amend my
3
motion to
people.
that. Thank you, President.
Okay, so Ms. Ogden, you agree to that change? And Mr. Osborne, will you second that change? All right, any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of approving the amended January 23rd, 2023, and the special board meeting held February 6th, 2023, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. All right, next we have citizens' comments, and first online we have Ms. Bobby Block. Mr. Johnson, if you could see if she's out there. Mr. Johnson, were you able to find her?
I'm here.
Oh, okay, thank you. Just a reminder that speakers have 3 minutes, and speakers are prohibited from making negative or derogatory comments using a name or position by which an individual can be identified. Comments may not be threatening, profane, vulgar, or abusive, or the speaker will be required to cease his or her comments. And Ms. Block, whenever you're ready.
Good evening. I am here tonight to highlight again the threat toxins pose to our community. We cannot deny not being aware of the danger and harm toxins pose to our children. Sharing with you another forum on PFAS, Forever Poisons, being held Thursday, February 23rd, starting 7 p.m. at the Bird Center. This is a documentary that illustrates the devastating fallout from PFAS. Though throughout the country, including West Virginia, you can also view the movie Dark Waters at your convenience, which highlights the poisonous results from the toxin behavior of DuPont in Parkersburg, West Virginia. The BoE cannot plead ignorance to this horrific threat of toxic pollution. It's hoped that the BoE will be proactive to avoid such devastation as was witnessed in Parkersburg. The responsibility of the BoE is to protect our children. Being silent regarding the possible PFAS generated by Rockwell when the BoE can resurrect, revise, and implement the Human Health Risk Assessment, HHRA, is negligence. Watching the Jefferson County students demonstrate their talents at the BoE meeting last month was a joy. It was fantastic that the junior ROTC raised thousands of dollars to protect children in our county from inclement weather. These young people showed such creativity and initiative. Such commitment and potential needs to be protected from corporate polluters. How many of the dancers can continue to perform if they develop asthma? Their well-being needs to take priority. The BoE not taking action jeopardizes their potential and enables an international polluter to crush their dreams. The fact that Rockwell admits that arsenic, formaldehyde, oxides, and zinc Just to name a few of the poisons used in the production of mineral wool is a nightmare. The BoE is helping to perpetuate. Please have the courage to make Rockwell accountable. Our children deserve clean air, water, and environment to reach their full potential. We urge you to take action in insisting that Rockwell be a responsible neighbor. The golden rule is critical. We can come together to make it clear that Jefferson County is unwilling to be an environmental sacrifice zone. Please, for the sake of our children, demonstrate courage to require Rockwell to be environmentally accountable to its neighbors. Overcome
Thank you,
corporate
Ms. Block.
intimidation.
Next, we have Maya Brown, followed by Floyd Braylock.
Is that right? Oh, there we go. My name is Maya Brown. My husband and I have 2 children in Jefferson County Schools. I have attended multiple board meetings and shared with this particular board the ongoing racial issues within your schools, from white students calling black students vulgar racial slurs to those same slurs being written on hallway and bathroom walls and on the ground around campus. It is not new information that your black students have all been disciplined far more for their response to the racial harassment and assault than your white students who are purposely causing the harm. It is also not new information that a handful of concerned parents have met with Dr. Gibson Learn to share our concerns and provide feedback as she takes on the task to make necessary adjustments on this county's discipline policy. As you take into consideration what you've heard from Dr. Gibson Learn, it's imperative you also consider a search for educators and administrators from underrepresented backgrounds, historically underrepresented groups, and candidates who are culturally responsive. Some, not all, but some educators and administrators you currently have employed in Jefferson County Schools have assisted in the creation of a toxic and hostile learning environment. This is your opportunity to change that reality and provide a safe learning environment for your Black students and subsequently all students. It was mentioned the appeal process and what message that sends to other students when a student is able to return the next day. Think about the message that is being sent to the students when a white student is walking the halls the day after they loudly and publicly spewed racial slurs towards a Black student. The message that is being sent is that there is a higher value seen in one student. The appeals process should not be touched until there is a better policy in place that protects Black students from the racial harassment and assaults the white students are getting away with. It is time this board takes a public stance against the racism that is happening in your schools and approve a discipline policy that actually holds those violators accountable. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Floyd Braylock, followed by Cassandra Hurlston Wills.
Hi, thank you for having me. My name is Floyd Braylock. I have one child left in Jefferson County Public Schools. The other one I poured out. James Baldwin once said, if I love you, I have to make you conscious of the things you can't see. I'm a Black man. I grew up in Baltimore City. I've been in Jefferson County for 15 years, and the Black parents have conversations about how do we protect our children in 2023. That's not a conversation we should be having about how do we protect our children, not just from the students, but from the policies and the umbrella that protects what's happening to our children in the schools. And it's not just the classrooms, it's on the football field, basketball courts, everywhere they go. To protect mine and his athletic potential, I put him out of the school system so that he doesn't get derailed by the system around him that can hold him down. My daughter's in 4th grade. We have to have conversations about race. She has all white friends. Doesn't understand, but I shouldn't have to have a conversation in 2023. The irony of it is, I think Jefferson County It's beautiful for the way that America is because it's really diverse. It's what America looks like. When people ask me, why do I live in West Virginia? I say because my children are allowed to be children, except for the fact that they have to deal with the unknown, things they can't see. That's what we're here for, to protect them from that. So when my son gets into a fight at school because somebody bullied him, and then I got to go to the school and yell at the principal that you're not going to make my son out to be a bully because he responded to what somebody did to him, that's not okay. And I want you guys to really see what's going on. And I appreciate you, and I think that you're here because you actually love teaching and incorporating goodness into the future of America. We love you for that. But as James Baldwin said, if you love the public, tell them. Make them conscious of the things they can't see. Admit it. We have a race problem in our schools, and we need the parents' help because everything starts at home. Parents that had a conversation. Every year, a new group of 6th graders come into school. That's a new 3 years. You can get new parents every year to help out, volunteer in schools. But the first thing you have to do is say, hey, we have a problem, we need help. We don't have the resources. I'll volunteer. I'll be on call. I work from home a lot. Call me, I'll be there. Most of the kids know me, they can come to me about anything. I'm a volunteer in the community, I coach in the community. All races and the colors, it doesn't matter. Children are children. But the issue that a lot of children have is that it starts at home. And until we can make the parents understand what their behavior is doing is affecting their children and how it's passed on.
Thank you, Mr. Braylock.
Thank you.
Next, we have Cassandra Hurlston-Wills. She's gone. Thank you. All right. Next, we have action on approval of the 23-24 draft calendar. Mrs. White.
Good evening. This evening, I would come before you to ask that...
Mrs. White, I'm sorry.
Yes,
Hang on one second.
certainly. Did you skip the consent agenda?
Yes, ma'am.
That's what I thought, but I'm following you, Madam Chair. I will concede the floor for a few minutes.
Thank you for your grace with my misstep there. Is there, are there any changes to the consent agenda?
No, ma'am, there are no changes.
All right. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Ogden. Is there a second? Thank you, Mr. Osborne. Any discussion?
Yeah, I would like to pull number 27 for discussion. And then I have a question about number 20. I don't know what that means. What is policy 5000?
I think I actually explained that at the last board meeting. I talked about policy 5000 reassignment, and that's a state policy where a certified teacher within a building can be reassigned to a vacant position that they're certified for without a posting.
So this teacher's leaving her current position in the middle of the year?
No, the effective date on the far right column says the 23-24 school year.
Oh, it's for next year?
Yeah, it's for next year.
Okay. Okay, that's that, and that's all the questions I have. But,
Okay.
yeah, I did want to pull 27 for discussion.
All right. Ms. Ogden, would you mind amending your motion to pull number 27?
Okay, and then we come back to it. We have to go in executive session now, or do we wait till the end?
We can wait till the end.
Okay, and then we'll come back and vote after. Okay, that's fine.
Mr. Osborne, are you okay with that? All right, so there is a motion to approve the consent agenda, removing number 27. Or any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Oppose? All right, thank you. All right, Mrs. White, take 2, the calendar. I'm just in denial that we're already looking at the 24 calendar.
I completely understand that. So as requested by the board, the calendar committee reviewed the Berkeley County Schools calendar. And as a result, we moved a faculty senate date to align with the one on the Berkeley County Schools calendar. All dates match Berkeley County Schools calendar for the benefit of the James Rumsey students, with the exception of 2 dates. October 10th, Berkeley County Schools is out of session and we're in session. Our equivalent to Professional Learning Day is on October 20th. Berkeley County puts their professional learning days around federal holidays. That's what they tend to do, whereas we, for the benefit of our staff, put them near the end of 9 weeks. Our other PL day is March 8th, which is at the end of the 3rd quarter. Other than that, the calendars line up perfectly. So this evening, I'm asking that you consider action on approving the calendar for next year.
Is there a motion to approve the 23-24 draft calendar?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Osborne. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Ogden. Any discussion?
Yeah, I have a question. Why don't we use the federal dates, the federal holidays?
The committee feels, and I would concur, that it benefits our staff to be able to have the opportunity not only for professional learning, but to have just that extra time near the end of the 9 weeks in order to get their grade books and things in order so that they're able to have a few minutes to make all of that work out. And near a federal holiday doesn't always coincide with the end of the 9 weeks.
I'm just curious, does the staff agree with this, or is just that committee?
Well, there are teachers on the committee, and that's the way we have made the calendar, is my understanding, for the last several years. So I believe staff are happy with that, yes. Chris, if you can speak to that. Mr. Walter's with us. He's a principal, and he's nodding in agreement.
That's fine. I was just asking.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so there's a motion to approve the 23-24 draft calendar. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Oppose? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And this is just the draft because it does have to go to the state to be approved, is that
It
correct?
does. We'll send the draft. It needs to be there by May 5th. Of course, we'll go ahead and send that. My understanding is it takes a couple weeks for approval.
But it does comply with all the state's regulations
Absolutely,
and rules.
it does.
So it should be approved. So
Right.
it should be the first day of school. Parents can pretty much count on it.
Yes.
Thank you, ma'am.
Would that make the May 2024 tentative graduation Sunday the 19th?
We haven't set that. Typically, the way you set graduation, yes.
Okay.
All right, thank you, ma'am. Next, we have a request approval to amend the comprehensive educational facilities plan.
We completed our annual update, and that is due every December. And in doing so, we're coming before the board this evening to ask that you make an amendment to the CEFP and add an ROTC wing for Jefferson High School. Without it being on the CEFP, should we want to make it eligible for funding through the School Building Authority, for example, it needs to be included as a project and a need in the county. So I'm asking this evening that you amend the CEFP to reflect that that's a project we'd like to do in Jefferson County.
I'll make a motion, we amend the CEFP to reflect the request from Ms. White that the ROTC wing be added on that.
A second.
Thank you. And just, I think we all are aware, but just for clarification, that is at Jefferson High School, correct?
Jefferson High School, yes.
Okay. So there's a motion to amend the comprehensive educational facilities plan to include an ROTC wing at Jefferson High School. Any other discussion?
I would personally like to see the plan. The CEFP plan, is that something that we can see?
It is available online for you under JCS Building the Future off of the menu.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, all in favor of amending the comprehensive educational facilities plan, say aye.
Aye.
Oppose? Thank you, ma'am.
You're welcome, and I will bring the CEFP to my next deputy update as well, the annual update. Thank you.
Next, we have possible action on advisory committee.
Jason, if you could put up the Citizens Advisory Committee policy. So as the board directed, we moved forward with having an online sign up for individuals. The last meeting I came and gave you the numbers for the signups for the different content areas. And following that, we sent a notice out to everyone who had signed up, asking them for information on their availability so we could begin the process of setting up advisory committee meetings. So what I'm here for today is to talk through a bit of process that would be compliant with the advisory committee policy that you have. And there are a number of elements to this, but I think the most pertinent of them in terms of organization is that, number one, it says that the board will appoint the members of the committee by a vote of the board. Number two, it says that the advisory committees are limited in that they shall not exceed 25 members. And it states that the members of the advisory will be appointed by the board for a term that is designated by the board. So all of those are things that we need to address in the process. So if you could put up the other document, Mr. Johnson, I would appreciate it.
Can I ask you a question? I mean, we have it here. This is 20 years old, correct, this policy? Is that the policy you're talking about?
Yes, ma'am.
So I just want to make it clear that just because this is a policy doesn't mean we have to use this policy, correct? We can,
if you did not, it's your policy. It hasn't been amended since then. It could be 100 years old, and if you haven't voted to put it out and change it, you have to abide by it. I do have some suggestions, which you can do with as you will, about how we can move forward and you can meet the letter of the law of that policy while still getting all of your advisory committees in. So
I personally would like to make a motion that we not use this policy and we create a policy. I mean, because like I said, this is 20 years old and there seems to be serious issues with this policy. I mean, we have that the board would appoint, and we had already told the public that anybody could sign up and be a part of it.
Mm-hmm.
And then, we have, I guess, 60 people for a committee.
Well, Dr. Joy, if you could, and I understand your concerns, so in order for you, and you as a board may decide that what you want to do next is to amend the advisory committee policy, I would appreciate if you would give me a second to make a suggestion about how you could move forward, because in order for you to do an amendment on the advisory policy, you would have to rewrite the policy, put it up at the next meeting, send it out for 2 weeks of public comment, vote on the one after that, and then you've lost another group of time. So I actually went and met with, and she's not here, but I have to give her a public shout out, Ms. Barbara Zing over at Washington High, who had reached out to me because we had had some conversation about some of the inherent difficulties in addressing board advisory committees of this size. And so after talking with her and working through some of the processes that she had seen used at the state level in the math committee, one of the things that we had talked about is I believe that we can set up an initial meeting for each one of these groups. So to your point, if we have the folks who are interested in human resources, right? Your own policy says that you are appointing these advisory committees to advise you on specific matters that you want information, you have interest in. So the idea is that we would pull together everyone who signed up for the Human Resources Committee. We would put them into one large group, and we have a couple of exercises to do with them that Ms. Ng actually very kindly volunteered to help facilitate, that would have them look at what they felt like the topics in that area that were the highest priority to address. So we'd have a big group, they can brainstorm. Are you most interested in, or do you think the most important thing is us being able to get substitutes through the process more quickly? Do you think the biggest issue is we need to change some of the retention incentives to keep our staff here? And then we'd have a process once they did the brainstorming of everyone on the committee voting for their top 3 priorities and then setting those, and individuals could choose which of those subgroups on particular subjects that they went to. If we have at least 3 of them, then we have enough slots to keep all of those subgroups at 25 or less, and they would be in specific categories. So we could then, so that allows us to go ahead, we can begin meeting with people in the next week, certainly in the next 2 weeks, depending on people's space availability, and have them defining for the board what they believe the most important issues in those groups are. I can bring back to you at the next meeting, here is everyone in all of these groups, and here are the subcommittees that they chose, and I can keep the subcommittees at 25 or less for each one of those subjects. And that will allow you to then appoint those people at that meeting just from a spreadsheet that I can give you. Here's this list of people, and here's the committees that they want to be on, and you approve the whole thing moving forward. You can set their term for as long as you like. I would suggest you do it for at least a year, and then they can have their first meeting before your next meeting. You appoint them, and then they can be off and running in March and doing their work. So some of this is to be able to meet that policy while still letting them move forward.
I think we need to be sure we have a variety of backgrounds on each of these committees and subcommittees.
Absolutely, of the people who have signed up, absolutely, yes, sir. And we do. If you, looking at the signups, there are parents and staff from all levels and from all, presumably, walks of life. I don't know every single person on all of those, but it's a pretty broad swath. I would say the one that's probably the most uniform, only because it's the most narrow, is the Semester Exam Advisory Committee. That is mostly high school teachers and a couple of parents, but mostly just because it doesn't pertain to all the rest of these groups. So but the rest of them are pretty broad. Like school nutrition, there's a pretty wide range of folks who are interested in that.
I like the idea as well that if you're interested in one specific thing, you don't have to sit in meeting after meeting after meeting when your concern is not addressed. So I think that's a good idea and a good way to address multiple concerns within the same idea. So thank you for that.
Sounds fine. I just still think that this 20-year-old policy ought to be updated, and maybe once the committees start meeting, they can help
create the policy, but
Absolutely, yes, ma'am. That can certainly be one of the things that the board looks at for changing on those. I just don't want to hold up them getting started for another month.
And it may be part of the Neola update anyway.
Certainly. Yes, ma'am.
Well, thank you for finding a workaround.
Yeah, doing my best, ma'am. Thank you.
All right, next we have board member comments and committee reports. Ms. Bratton, do you have anything?
I would like to congratulate all of our basketball teams that have made the playoffs. And we're hoping this week, Jefferson County, either one of our middle schools will go to the championship, which will be held on Thursday. So also, congratulations to our high school, our Jefferson team. And just to say that we're proud of all of our athletes, and because it's just more than just being an athlete. You have to hold your grades at a certain place too. So just want to say we're proud of everybody, and thank you to our parents for allowing your children to participate. Thank you.
Mr. Osborne?
I have nothing at this time.
Mrs. Ogden?
I just ask for thoughts and prayers for safe travel. I think the kids for the science fair are going to Morgantown tomorrow, and Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday are the swim state championship down in is that Morgantown as well, I think. So just, that they would be safe travels, and everybody, including family members going to see them, would get home safely.
Dr. Joy?
I wanted to recognize that this is Black History Month, and it's a good opportunity to highlight the positive contributions of Black Americans. The Cultural Diversity and Equity group is not meeting this month. They're going to meet again in March. I wanted to thank the Washington High School and Jefferson High School students who made it out to the Snowball charity. They raised $6,400 and donated $500 of that to the Sheriff's Reserve for helping to chaperone the big event, and then $5,900 was donated to the Boys and Girls Club. Wanted to congratulate all senior athletes who've been recognized at their sporting events, and a special recognition to Tyler Lee, manager and leader of the student section at Jefferson High School. The South Jefferson Elementary School, several students received positive principal referrals. They show positive leadership as students, and these are Gabe Brown, Evan Devaney, Alice Harrell, Julian Matthews, James North, Charlotte Getz. Let's see. And then wanted to congratulate Julian Matthews was not on that last list. Julian Matthews will be running track at the University of Charleston. She signed with them. Then there are the state swim qualifiers, and the Cougar Boys are the Region 2 champs. There are about 20 different qualifiers. You probably don't want me to read all their names, but I have them. Isaiah Fritz and Evan Terrell, congratulations to them. Also, Orrin Humphrey. They all three will be playing football at Shepherd. I wanted to remind students, any senior is eligible to apply for the Terry Lee Walker Junior Scholarship. The deadline is March 3rd, so all seniors can apply. And dual enrollment night at Shepherd, the first one is February 23rd at 6 p.m. That's all I have.
I just want to do a quick shout out to all of our guidance counselors because last week was National Guidance Counselor Week. And last year, Dr. Gibson Learn, myself, and Jennifer Stuntz from Washington High School went down to the State Board of Education and did a presentation on our guidance programs. And I believe we almost brought a tear to their eye. They were so impressed with our robust program and the fact that we have a guidance counselor at every school. We are really, really fortunate to have the support of our community for that. And then finally, in regards to number 27 on the agenda tonight, I just want to thank the teachers and support staff we have. You do what you do because you love it and it's part of your life. Being a principal is more of a lifestyle than a career, and being a superintendent is your life. So I just want to thank you for making Jefferson County a priority in your life and making a difference. So thank you. All right. Madam Superintendent, do you have any comments this evening? All right, and now we have an executive session for personnel and for number 27 on the consent agenda. Is there a motion to go into executive session? Thank you, Ms. Ogden. Is there a second? Thank you, Ms. Bratton. All in favor say aye. All right. Thank you very much, and we do anticipate action.